Not all souls rest in peace. Some return not for comfort, but for retribution. This is not just a tale whispered by the fire. It is a true story, and it happened here not so long ago. In the small village of Saint Luce, nestled in the French countryside, the family of Pierre Dubois is the only one to own a private cemetery, established 3 generations ago. It is said that when Pierre's grandfather was a powerful local official, he used his influence to purchase the land of a neighboring family behind his house. He had the area leveled and turned into a private cemetery, instructing his descendants that the land held a hidden spiritual energy that would ensure the Dubois family's prosperity for generations. The cemetery lies in a low-lying area, surrounded by an old wooden fence. It is perpetually gloomy, shaded by ancient oak trees whose drooping branches block out the light. A massive old oak growing on one side adds to the eerie atmosphere, its dense canopy preventing sunlight from reaching the graves, making them appear even more desolate, especially during foggy mornings or at dusk. However, it seems the geomancer's predictions were wrong. Over the next 2 or 3 generations, the Dubois family gradually declined, going from prominent figures to ordinary farmers. Though called a decline, they still owned vast lands, and compared to most villagers, the Dubois family remained wealthy and lived more comfortably than most. But what gnawed at Pierre was his deep-seated desire for power. He craved the respect and fear that came with authority, not just the status of a wealthy man. Wealth without the grandeur and dominance he sought left him unfulfilled. Pierre went to great lengths to find a renowned geomancer from Brittany, inviting him to examine the cemetery behind the house. He recounted the story of his grandfather, the former official, hoping the geomancer could alter the family's fate and restore their path to glory. But after carefully studying the land, the geomancer said, "Your fate is already blessed to this extent, and that is a great fortune. The future holds uncertainties, but you must perform good deeds and accumulate virtue. The ancients taught, first accumulate virtue, then seek good land. Long ago, a foreign official used geomancy to suppress sacred sites, weakening the spirit of the people. Such techniques are sinister, like sacrificing a young girl to alter the land's energy. I could perform a similar ritual to change your fate, but it would be a wicked act, damaging your moral virtue. Your descendants would suffer grave consequences, perhaps losing everything and wandering as beggars." Hearing this, Pierre sighed in despair. He bid the geomancer farewell and walked to the cemetery behind the house, lighting incense at each grave. His loyal black cat, which he had raised from a kitten, followed closely behind. Pierre gazed sadly at the nearly 20 identical graves, many covered in green moss from years of neglect. To strangers, the orderly rows of tombs evoked an eerie feeling, but for Pierre's family, they were a familiar sight, unnoticed in daily life. On some misty moonlit nights, his children even dared to gather in the cemetery, sitting on a flat tombstone to hold seances, summoning spirits to ask about the future. After the geomancer left, Pierre's wife Marie looked at her husband and gently said, "The geomancer was right, dear. We are already so fortunate to have what we do. Virtue comes from the heart. He said we should do good deeds, so let's follow his advice. From now on, help whoever we can and stop seeking out geomancers. It's costly and brings no benefit. In my opinion, living honestly and kindly is the best path." Pierre frowned and snapped, "You speak so wisely, don't you? When have I not been generous?" During the flood years ago, who paid for the relief efforts? Without me, the village wouldn't have had enough land to bury the dead. Have you forgotten? And during the drought, when the villagers were starving, I opened my granary and fed them for half a year. Isn't that doing good? Marie responded, softly, goodness gracious. I don't mean to offend, but the wealth from your grandfather. It was. What about it? Pierre interrupted sharply. Are you saying it was ill-gotten, fleeced from the poor? I forbid you to mention that again. Listening to the nonsense of those gossips outside, Marie, swallowing her pride, explained, why? Do you scold me at every turn? I'm only thinking of you and the children. I'm just repeating what the geomancer said, that we must do good with a sincere heart. How could I forget the flood relief or the food distributions? I was the one, along with the servants, carrying baskets of food to the riverbank, handing out cloth to the poor. Do you think I don't remember? But dear, those acts were done to win favor for your campaign for councillor, not out of kindness. We may fool people, but how can we deceive the heavens? Pierre's face paled, and he shouted, be quiet. You live in luxury in this house, with servants at your beck and call, yet you dare speak so ungratefully. Terrified, Marie quietly retreated into the house. She reflected on the long years living with her husband, bearing him 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. Indeed, she had never wanted for food or clothing, even if the family's fortunes had slightly waned compared to before. But their personalities clashed deeply, and she was always the one to endure. She was kind-hearted, while Pierre seemed to harbor a natural cruelty. Jacques, the kitchen hand who had worked for the family for nearly 10 years, once stole a few kilograms of rice to feed his elderly mother. Pierre's daughter caught him and raised the alarm. To Marie, it was a minor matter, not worth making a fuss over. She called Jacques over and scolded him lightly. You foolish boy. If you needed rice, why didn't you just ask me? Steal again, and you'll regret it. She scolded him only for show, knowing Jacques was honest and had acted out of desperation. Unfortunately, Pierre overheard from upstairs. He summoned Jacques, beat him with a stick until he could barely walk, and dismissed him on the spot. Marie pleaded for leniency, but Pierre was unmoved, saying, keeping someone like that in the house will only invite trouble, perhaps even thieves. Better to get rid of him and be done with it. Marie quietly slipped some money to Jacques and told him to take it home to his elderly mother, instructing him to come to her privately whenever he was in desperate need, promising she would help. Her acts of kindness were driven not only by her naturally compassionate nature, but also by a desire to atone for her husband's wrongs, to repay the moral debts incurred by Pierre's unjust and ruthless actions. Marie wasn't devoutly religious, but she held a simple belief: do good and you'll be blessed. Sow evil and you'll reap a storm. Previously, Pierre had held a grudge against Antoine Leroux, a neighbor, over a dispute about buying a few acres of fertile land at the edge of the village. When the deal didn't go his way, Pierre sent his men under the cover of night to Antoine's property. They hid several bottles of illicit liquor and distilling equipment near the pond by the bamboo hedge and tipped off the local authorities. Sure enough, that year, Antoine was arrested with all the incriminating evidence. A copper still half filled with 30 liters of moonshine, a sack of prepared rice, a stirring rod, and 2 pig bladders items used solely for brewing illegal liquor. Marie knew of this scheme, but didn't dare confront her husband. She only sighed, pained by his immoral actions. She worried for their children, fearing they would bear the consequences of their father's deeds. She firmly believed in the law of karma, the cycle of cause and effect. Children thrive on their parents' virtue, she often heard, and this made her especially anxious for her two daughters. The couple had 4 children. Their eldest son, Louis, was married with 2 children and lived in the village. Their daughter, Claire, recently wed but childless, lived in a neighboring village across a cornfield. The third child, Elise, and the youngest, Henry, still lived with their parents. For such a grand ancestral home 3 generations old, with sturdy brick walls, tiled roofs, and polished oak beams, the family was relatively small. The imposing mansion, with its majestic appearance, housed only Pierre, Marie, their 2 youngest children, a maid, and the black cat. The maid, Sophie, had served the Dubois family for 20 years. The black cat, which Pierre had raised from a kitten, was now fully grown and known in the village as the Shadow for its constant attachment to Pierre. It followed him everywhere, even curling up in his bedroom at night, rarely bothering to chase mice. In St. Luce, most villagers were poor, living in thatched cottages with mud walls, which made the Dubois mansion stand out even more. On elevated ground, with its moss-covered tiled roof and deep red oak columns, the house exuded an air of solemn grandeur, amplifying the authority of its owner whenever villagers came, hat in hand, to borrow money. Pierre's money-lending business, with its exorbitant interest rates, had made him even wealthier. Marie, however, often secretly reduced the interest or forgave debts entirely when borrowers fell into hardship. Pierre, on the other hand, never let a single cent slip through his fingers. In their sprawling estate, the Dubois family lived comfortably, not only because of their wealth, but also because their children were well behaved. Marie felt particularly blessed because Louis had given her 2 adorable grandchildren. Though Claire had no children yet, her husband was kind and her in-laws treated her well, unlike many other families in St. Luce. Marie believed this was the result of the virtue she had quietly cultivated through her charitable acts. But Pierre saw things differently. Whenever Marie praised Claire's in-laws for their kindness, he would smirk smugly and say, "They're afraid of my influence, that's all. They wouldn't dare mistreat Claire." Marie suppressed a sigh, swallowing her frustration to avoid arguing. Life flowed calmly, like a gentle stream. But one early morning, before anyone in the household had stirred, before the roosters crowed, the black cat, dozing on a chair beside Pierre and Marie's bed, suddenly leaped up, bolted through the window, and let out a piercing yowl. With a long, eerie cry, it raced across the tiled roof, jumped down to the courtyard, and began hissing and growling as if enraged. Cats fighting was nothing unusual, but then there came a knock at the door. Marie jolted upright, peering through. The window's slats into the thick fog outside, where dawn had yet to break. Thinking Pierre was still asleep, she tiptoed out of bed, muttering under her breath as she tied up her hair. Who's knocking at this hour? But Pierre was already awake, roused by the cat's commotion. Intending to relieve himself, he said to his wife, "Stay there. I'll see who dares disturb us at this hour." Both assumed it was Sophie, the long-serving maid who slept in the kitchen, reporting something urgent, or perhaps one of their children, Elise or Henry, needing to speak. With them, Pierre slipped on his clogs, walked to the door, and unlatched it. The sky was still dark, cloaked in dense fog. He opened his eyes wide, about to speak, when he froze in shock. Standing in the courtyard, shrouded in the misty haze, was a little girl, about 3 years old, her face barely visible. She stretched out her hand and pleaded, "Sir, please, give me some food. I'm so hungry." The child stood just a few steps away, but her voice echoed strangely, as if coming from some distant, otherworldly place. Pier, with his usual brashness, barked, "Whose child are you? Begging in the middle of the night? Get out of here. You're ruining my sleep. I'll give you a slap if you don't leave." Despite his harsh words, the girl stood still, gazing up at him with an ethereal calm, her face pale, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring straight into his. Within moments, Pier's composure crumbled. A sudden icy gust seemed to sweep over him, sending shivers down his spine. The girl repeated, her voice deeper and more haunting, "I'm so hungry. Please, sir, have mercy and give me some food." Pier stood speechless, his mouth agape, his eyes glazed over. At that moment, a woman's voice called from the gate, "My child, come back, my child. Come to your mother." Pier, terrified, looked toward the gate and saw a woman, dressed in stark white, standing at the far end of the courtyard, near the gate, waving her hand. The distance and the thick fog obscured her face, but her long jet-black hair stood out against her white dress. Still dazed, Pier watched as the black cat leaped down beside him, yowling ferociously, its eyes blazing, baring its sharp teeth as if ready to pounce on the child. Its claws, long and sharp, scratched furiously at the stone floor. Pier's heart pounded as if it would burst. In the blink of an eye, the girl vanished. He looked toward the gate again, and the two white figures, the woman and the child, were now at the far end of the courtyard, hand in hand, stepping out through the gate and disappearing into the bamboo grove by the road. It took a long while for Pier to regain his senses. Stumbling back into the house, he stammered, "Marie, Marie, come here, quick, Marie." He staggered inside, slamming the door shut. Marie, stepping down from the bed, asked in surprise, "What did Sophie need, calling so early?" Pier, trembling, sat on the bed, shaking his head frantically. After a moment, he regained enough composure to say, "No, it wasn't Sophie." "What? If it wasn't Sophie, then who was knocking at this hour? Elise or Henry?" Pier gripped his wife's hand tightly, his own hand ice cold. Gasping for breath, he said, "Marie, go see if it's still out there." Marie, confused, replied, "Who are you talking about?" "The little girl." Marie was even more puzzled. "What little girl? There are no children in this house." "I don't know whose child it was, begging for food." "The poor thing, begging at this hour? We have plenty of leftover food. Why didn't you give her something?" "All right, I'll go to the kitchen and have Sophie get something for her." With that, Marie hurried toward the door, her kind heart urging her on. Pier called after her, "Yes, go see if she's still in the courtyard." Pier sat, eyes wide, staring after his wife, anxiously awaiting her return. When she opened the door, the black cat darted inside, leaping onto its usual chair. In the darkness, its eyes gleamed like two flickering flames, tinged with a hint of red. Marie stepped out onto the porch, scanning the courtyard and both sides of the veranda, but saw no child. She strained her eyes, trying to peer through the thick morning fog toward the gate. Standing on the porch, she called back, "There's no one out here. No child, no adult, nothing. You must have mistaken a shadow for something else. Who would dare come begging at our house at this hour?" Pierre, still uneasy, called out, "If there's no one, come back inside. Close the door." Marie did as her husband said, returning to bed. But Pierre asked her to light the oil lamp. Turning it upright and placing it on the table in the middle of the room before lying down beside him. She noticed his whole body was still trembling, and he pulled a thin blanket up to his neck, his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Marie found it strange that Pierre, who usually couldn't sleep with even the faintest light from the altar lamp, now insisted on having the room illuminated. Normally, he would complain repeatedly that any light kept him awake. Turning to him, Marie placed a hand on his forehead, then slid it down to his arm and hand, finding every part of him ice cold. Worried, she asked, "Why are you so cold? It's summer, how can you be this chilled?" She could hear his teeth chattering, as if he were standing in a winter storm. Concerned, she pressed, "Are you feeling all right? Did you catch a chill? When you opened the door, stay still, I'll get some eucalyptus leaves and warm them over the fire to rub you down." Pierre shook his head, trying to speak calmly. "It's nothing." "But you heard it too, didn't you? The knocking at the door?" "Yes, I heard it before you did," Marie replied. "The cat yowled first, then came the knocking," Pierre recounted slowly. "Exactly. You're my witness. There was definitely a knock. I opened the door, and there was a little girl standing in the courtyard, holding out her hand, begging for food. Her skin was pale, almost like a rich man's child, yet she was begging at this hour. Isn't that strange? I told her to leave, but she just stood there, staring at me. And suddenly, I felt an icy chill. In this month, where would such cold come from?" Mid-sentence, the black cat let out another piercing yowl and leaped to the floor. This time, instead of bolting out the window, it pounced toward the front door, clawing furiously at the wood, baring its teeth and growling incessantly. Pierre, turning to face the commotion, gripped Marie's arm tightly, his eyes fixed on the cat. Moments later, another knock came at the door. Pierre nearly shouted in terror, but remained frozen, clutching his wife's arm. The knocking grew more insistent, driving the cat to leap at the door, its growls turning more frantic. Shaking, Pierre stammered, It's back, Marie. It hasn't left." Marie gently pried his hand off and said, "I'll give it some food so it'll go. Honestly, how silly. A child comes begging in the middle of the night. Should we just shoo it away? Stay there. I'll get some food from the kitchen." She slipped out of bed quickly, put on her clogs, and headed to the door. Pierre sat up, eyes wide, watching her every move. As Marie unlatched the door, she called out, "Who's knocking?" "Hold on, I'm opening it. What's all this racket?" She swung the wooden door wide, and the cat stepped out but returned moments later, calmly curling up beside Pierre. Marie stepped onto the porch, surprised to find no one there. She looked toward the gate, but saw no figure in the fog. Irritated, she shouted, "Who's banging on my door?" No one answered. She muttered, "Strange. There was definitely a knock just now. Where did they disappear to so quickly? Whoever's playing tricks better not let me catch you." She lingered a moment longer, then returned to bed. Pierre, anxious, asked, "Did you see the girl?" "Nothing." Out there, Marie replied. But you heard the knocking both times, didn't you? It wasn't a dream, Pierre insisted. The first time, I went out and saw her standing right in front of me. This time, you went, and she was gone. What's going on? Asterisk both fell silent, unable to find an explanation. After a pause, Pierre whispered, as if to himself, "Was it a person or a ghost?" Marie responded quickly, "Ghosts? Nonsense. Probably some kid playing a prank." But deep down, she began to wonder, who would dare prank them in the middle of the night? Even during the day, no one would be so bold. Hesitating, she asked, "But Pierre, did you really see a child? Are you sure?" Pierre snapped lightly. "Marie, I'm not a young fool. I've never seen a ghost in my life, but tonight felt strange." Marie interrupted. "I think you were half asleep, your eyes playing tricks. Think about it. Who goes begging at midnight? Especially a child. At this hour, they'd be fast asleep, impossible to wake, let alone wandering the streets." Pierre's fear deepened. If his wife was right, then it surely wasn't human. It was a ghost. Marie suddenly sat up, slipped out of bed, and Pierre asked in a panic, "Where are you going?" "I'm calling Sophie," she replied, slipping. On her clogs, Marie boldly unlatched the door, opening it slightly. The rusty hinges creaked loudly. She peered into the distance, but of course saw no one. The fog still cloaked the dim courtyard. She stepped out, stood on the porch for a moment, and hearing no sound, hurried to the kitchen and called Sophie. The maid, sleeping on a cot by the kitchen door, sat up, tying her hair, and answered, "Yes, ma'am?" "What's the matter? So early?" Marie sat beside her and asked, "Sophie, did you forget to lock the gate last night?" Sophie replied firmly, "Goodness, no, ma'am. I locked the gate and bolted it tight. I'd never forget. Miss Elise can vouch for me. She was coming back from bathing at the pond and walked with me to close the gate. Ask her if you don't. Believe me." Marie sat silently, lost in thought. Sophie, growing anxious, asked, "Is something wrong, ma'am? Did something happen? A thief in the house? I'm worried." Not wanting to alarm Sophie or let the story spread to the children, Marie stood and said, "No, I was just checking." She stepped back into the courtyard, glancing around once more. Pierre, still lying in bed with his eyes closed, heard her footsteps and called out, "Did you tell Sophie?" "No, I just asked if she locked the gate last night," Marie replied. "And what did she say?" "She swore she locked it, and Lisa was with her. They closed it together." Marie slipped back into bed, murmuring, "It's so strange. I still think you saw wrong. What child would be out there?" Pierre, now calmer, retorted, "Fine, say I was mistaken. But you heard the knocking both times, didn't you? It wasn't just me." "Who was knocking then?" "You ran out right after the second knock and saw no one. Our courtyard is wide open. Where could anyone hide? If someone was pranking us, where did they go? You got there so quickly. Could a person run that fast? Think about it." Marie, hearing his reasoning, had to admit he made sense. She muttered, "You're right. Our courtyard has no hiding spots." Pierre grew more convinced he had encountered a ghost. From that moment, they lay silently side by side, each lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until the roosters in the village began crowing and the sounds of villagers heading to the fields filled the wide dirt road in front of the house that Pierre Exhausted, sat up and stepped onto the porch. He looked out at the brick courtyard, now gradually brightening in the dawnlight as the sun rose. Pierre felt clearer-headed, the fear from the night fading. He walked slowly to the gate and found it still securely closed, the heavy brass lock in place as always. For generations, their wealth had prompted the family to build a high wall around the property, and the gate was locked every night to prevent theft. A locked gate meant no adult could have entered, let alone a small child of 3 or 4. Pierre wandered back, circling the courtyard. The sun peeked through the oak trees, casting vibrant morning rays that stretched his shadow across the bricks. He stepped onto the porch and sat wearily on the step where he had spoken to the strange child earlier. The black cat followed quietly. Curling up on his lap, Marie came up from the kitchen, carrying a tray of tea to place on the table for her husband, as was her custom. But Pierre waved her over, pointing to the courtyard and saying, "Right there." Marie. She was standing right there. Marie set the tea tray on the porch and sat beside an oak pillar. She flipped over 2 glass cups and poured the tea, the steam rising gently. Pierre had a habit of drinking a hot, strong cup of tea every morning before washing his face at the kitchen basin. Seeing the worry in her husband's eyes, Marie wondered, could a neighborhood child have sneaked in during the night to play a prank, just to scare them? The village was full of mischievous kids. She asked, "So this child, whose could it be? Did you see its face clearly? Do you recognize it?" Pierre replied, "How would I know?" Thinking back, I'm certain it wasn't a beggar child. A beggar wouldn't wear such pristine white clothes. And you're right. What parent would send their child to beg in the middle of the night, knocking on someone's door? They'd get a beating for it. Marie nodded in agreement immediately. I only said that because I was worried you'd make yourself sick with fear. I don't want this story spreading to the village. People's tongues are vicious. They'd say our families' immoral deeds have brought retribution. The words immoral deeds were emphasized, a pointed reference to Pierre's past actions. Pierre seemed to catch her meaning, blinking as he took a large gulp of tea, saying nothing. Marie glanced at him, noticing he seemed more alert now, no longer trembling as he had in the night. Yet his eyes still carried a heavy burden, and his face was pale, like someone recovering from a long fever. To reassure him, she returned to her earlier reasoning, hoping to ease his lingering fear. Good heavens, you scared me so much last night. I thought you were coming down with a fever. Pierre nodded and said, "Make sure you don't breathe. A word of this to anyone outside, Marie. Not to Sophie, not to Elise, not to Henry." Marie agreed at once, reiterating, "And who says it was a ghost? You said you saw a child standing here begging for food this morning, but when I opened the door, I saw no one. I'm worried you were half asleep, your eyes blurred in the fog, mistaking one thing for another." Pierre hoped she was right, that the image of the child at his doorstep and the woman at the gate were mere illusions. But deep down, he knew they weren't. With a weary smile, he said to his wife, "You know I despise nonsense and superstition. You're the one who believes in those silly tales, not me. Have I ever believed in ghosts? Yet now I've seen one, with my own eyes." Just then Sophie, the maid, and the 2 children came up from the kitchen. Elise, over 20, and Marie's beloved daughter, sat beside her mother and asked with concern, "What's going on, Mother? Was there a thief last night? Why did I see you go to the kitchen to wake Sophie so early?" Pierre shot a glance at his wife, signaling her to be cautious. Marie quickly waved her hand, explaining, "No thief, dear. I just asked Sophie if she forgot to lock the gate, that's all." Elise, puzzled, pressed, "But I clearly heard Father talking to someone on the porch. It woke me up, and I was about to come out when I saw you running to the kitchen to call Sophie." Marie laughed, nudging her daughter. "Your father was half asleep, that's all. Talking to someone in the middle of the night? Nonsense." Henry, 16, and having finished the 3rd grade of primary school, since the village school offered no further classes, sat beside his sister, listening intently but saying nothing. Sophie, the maid, changed the subject. "Are you and Miss Elise going to the market today, ma'am? Shall I get the baskets ready?" Marie turned to her daughter. "Are you going or staying home?" Elise looked surprised and replied, "Of course I'm going, Mother. It's market day. You said you'd buy fabric to make Henry and me each 2 new shirts." Marie sighed. "Yes, you're right. If we're going, we'd better leave early. The fog's thick, but the sun will be blazing soon." She turned to her husband. "Do you need anything from the market?" Pierre answered listlessly, "Check. If we have any lotus-scented tea left in the cupboard. If not, buy me a few packets." Marie stood, heading inside, saying, "All right, I'll check." She urged Elise to get ready, then told Sophie, "Just grab a basket. We're not buying much, no need for both." Sophie and Elise went to the kitchen, while Henry wandered to the backyard to check on a bird's nest in the lemon tree. Pierre sat alone on the porch, gazing silently at the gate, lost in thought. The fear from the night had mostly faded under the sunlight. He pondered his life, wondering why a ghost would come to him, or rather why it chose to haunt him. Tales of it. Afterlife, of restless spirits lingering in the world of the living, were common enough. But they were just stories, fantasies, never something anyone had truly witnessed. Pierre had always believed that until last night, when his worldview took a sharp turn. Encounters with the spirit world were real, not just embellished tales. To captivate listeners, he hoped this would be the end of it, that it wouldn't happen again. Letting out a heavy sigh, he reached for his pipe. Glancing up, he noticed a black crow perched on a branch of the sycamore tree by the house, staring at him intently. He waved it away, but the crow stayed put. He threw a small stone, and it flapped its wings, circling before returning to the same spot, still watching him. Unnerved, Pierre stood and retreated inside. The day passed quickly. At noon, Pierre paced slowly along the porch under the cool shade of the eaves. Marie and Elise hadn't yet returned from the market. The black cat, trailing him, suddenly let out a yowl and bolted toward the main gate, leaping and clawing at it as if battling an invisible, ferocious enemy. Pierre, standing on the porch, felt goosebumps rise on his skin, staring in shock. He saw nothing but the cat, growling and scratching alone. After a moment, the cat stopped, stood still by the bamboo hedge, then returned to Pierre. Gasping for breath, he sat on the porch steps, stroking the cat's back, certain that a ghost had appeared at the gate. But in daylight, he couldn't see it. The scene confirmed an old saying. Around the living, countless spirits of the dead linger, invisible to mortal eyes. Perhaps at that very moment, as he sat there, the ghostly mother and child were sitting beside him, unseen. His mind raced with unease, until Marie and Elise returned from the market. He forced a smile, standing up, but said nothing about the cat's encounter with the ghost at the gate, though the strange incident had frightened him. It happened in daylight, so the terror wasn't overwhelming. His real fear was that the white-clad child would knock again that night. In the afternoon, he quietly went to the family cemetery behind the house, lighting incense at each grave, earnestly praying to his ancestors to protect him from this ordeal, to keep the ghostly child from returning. For the first time in his family cemetery, Pierre felt an eerie chill, a heavy air of death. As he closed his eyes to pray, he sensed someone watching him from behind. Turning, he saw no one. He resumed praying, but the feeling persisted. Looking again, he spotted the black crow perched on a branch of the ancient oak, just a few meters away. Startled, he threw a stone, and the crow let out a mournful caw before flying to the sycamore tree by the house, waiting for him. That evening, Pierre ate a hasty meal and retreated to his room, fearing the darkness outside in the courtyard and among the trees. Lying in bed, he tossed and turned restlessly. Marie lit incense at the altar, then, to humor her husband, went to bed early. The black cat, as usual, leaped onto its chair beside their bed. Marie chatted about trivial market gossip, avoiding any mention of the previous night to keep Pierre calm. He responded with vague murmurs, clearly distracted, his mind still tangled with the events, unable to shake them off. Near midnight, Marie fell asleep, exhausted, while Pierre remained awake, shifting from side to side. He desperately needed to relieve himself, but was too afraid to go alone. Waking Marie to accompany him seemed absurd. The outhouse was behind the kitchen, and he imagined crossing the dark courtyard, only to be confronted by the two white figures blocking his path enough to make him faint from fear. Suppressing a sigh, he closed his eyes, trying to force sleep. Outside, the night was deep, and he heard the steady drip of dew from the tiled roof onto the brick courtyard. Pulling the blanket over his face, he felt stifled, struggling to breathe. The air was still, the trees in the garden motionless. Pierre thought back to his years in St. Luce. As a young man, he'd roamed the village at night, under moonlight or in pitch darkness, never knowing fear. Even after marriage, with his prominent status, he'd walked home alone countless times after, drinking at a neighbor's house or watching a play at the village square, through quiet paths lined with drooping trees. Ghost stories had never slowed his confident stride. Yet, since last night, the mere sight of darkness filled him with dread. His lush garden, once a place of leisure, now felt safe only in daylight. He recalled someone saying that ghosts are always around us, but only reveal themselves to those they choose. Why had they chosen him to terrify? He racked his brain, but found no answer. Sometime later, as he turned onto his back, the cat beside him let out a blood-curdling yowl, leaping through the window and racing across the roof, its cries tearing through the night. Then came a knock at the front door. Pierre's heart lurched, and he threw off the blanket, sitting up to listen. The same deliberate knocks as the night before echoed again. He held his breath, waiting. The knocking grew urgent, and he glanced at Marie, hoping she'd heard it too. But she slept soundly, her breathing steady, undisturbed. Pierre gently shook her shoulder. She stirred, turning to face the wall, her back to him. The knocking continued. The cat's wails grew more desperate, its claws scraping frantically at the wooden door. Pierre, as if in a trance, half conscious, lost all control. Throwing off the blanket, he stumbled to the door, unlatched it, and flung it open. The black cat shot back to his feet, biting his trouser leg, tugging hard as if trying to pull him back inside. But Pierre stood frozen, as if hypnotized. The scene unfolded exactly as it had the previous night. In the faint mist, the little girl, in pristine white clothes, stood before him, her hair falling over part of her pale face. Extending her hand, "Please, sir, give me some food. I'm so hungry." Pierre stood rooted to the spot, unable to speak. Far off, at the gate, he saw the young woman in white, calling out, "Come back, my child. Come to your mother." The voices of both mother and child were clear, yet chilling, as if echoing from the underworld. Their faces were hazy, unrecognizable. The girl pleaded again, "Please, sir, have mercy. Give me some food. I'm starving." And immediately after, the mother's voice rang out from the gate, "Come back, my child. Come to your mother." The black cat lunged toward the girl, and she instantly turned and vanished. Pierre blinked, snapping out of his daze. He saw the mother and child, hand in hand, moving toward the gate. He stood trembling, as if something held his feet to the ground. A minute later, he came to his senses. As he turned to go inside, hand gripped his shoulder. He screamed, spinning around, only to find Marie. She asked, "What are you doing out here?" Pierre panted as if he'd run a marathon. Marie guided him inside, sitting him in a chair and turning up the oil lamp. The black cat followed, leaping onto its usual spot. Only then did Marie notice the sweat-drenched, ashen face of her husband. She poured him a cup of hot tea and said, "Sit down, calm yourself. Drink this to steady your nerves." She grabbed a cloth from the bed's edge and wiped his face. Pierre drained the cup, asked for another, then said shakily, "Marie, come with me. I need to use the outhouse." Marie complied, noticing a rare meekness in her usually domineering husband. She went ahead, holding the lamp high to light his way. As she opened the door, Pierre let out a scream and stumbled back, seeing two figures standing on the porch, waiting for him. Marie scolded, "Why do you keep shouting in the middle of the night? You'll wake the whole village." The two figures rushed to support him. It was Sophie and Elise. Sophie spoke, "It's just me, sir." Pierre clutched his chest, gasping, and snapped, "What are you two doing out here? I thought you were ghosts." Elise explained, "I was sleeping when I heard you shout, Father. I woke Sophie, and we came to see if you were all right." Marie, weary, said, "Go back to bed, all of you. I'll wash my face to clear my head. Your father's been delirious since last night, talking nonsense." To Sophie, she added, "Go back to sleep. It's still early. I'll call if I need you." Marie led Pierre to the courtyard, gripping her arm tightly as he walked slowly beside her. He avoided looking toward the gate, imagining the two white figures still waiting. At the side of the house, Marie set the lamp on the concrete ledge, wetting a cloth for Pierre to wash his face. She stood by as he relieved himself near the banana tree. The wind rustled through the trees, the banana leaves flapping loudly, and the oil lamp flickered out, sending Pierre into another panic. Louis sighed, rushing into the house to find his mother. Marie snapped, "You should be upstairs entertaining the guests and pouring wine for the officials. Why are you skulking in the kitchen? Get back up there. Don't keep them waiting." Pierre returned to the dining table, laughing heartily and clinking glasses. Oblivious to Claire, who was anxiously waiting for him under the old oak tree. Louis felt uneasy but couldn't leave the guests. Out in the fields, Claire paced, sat, and stood again, her resentment toward both father and son growing with each passing moment. As the sun set and neither Pierre nor Louis came to meet her, she trudged back to the town, disappointed. Time passed, and for the next 6 months, Pierre was busy entertaining guests, confident he was on the verge of a major promotion. He stopped, visiting the town's cabaret. But fate had other plans. At the last moment, circumstances shifted dramatically, and the counselor position he'd been chasing was abolished after he'd spent a fortune greasing palms from the village to the province. Heartbroken over his thwarted ambitions and squandered money, Pierre realized his family's ancestral graves no longer brought good fortune for officialdom. After moping for a few months, he returned to the old cabaret in town. The proprietress greeted him with a wistful smile. "My goodness, it's been ages since you graced us with your presence, sir. We've been talking about you." Pierre strode in arrogantly and asked with a sneer, "How's my Claire doing? Does she still remember me, or has she forgotten me entirely?" The proprietress stared, thinking he was joking. After a pause, she said, "What? You haven't heard? Claire quit when she was 3 months pregnant. I don't know where she went. Later, I heard she gave birth prematurely at the charity hospital, and both she and the baby passed away." Pierre showed no reaction. The proprietress recited 4 lines of poetry, the opening of a song by a poet that Pierre used to enjoy hearing Claire sing while lying beside her. "Who will share my heart's truth? Who will hear my soul's song? In the quiet night, all seems calm. But where have you gone, leaving the music behind?" Pierre listened without a word of regret for the ill-fated woman. Sensing his indifference, the proprietress dropped the subject. Only as she saw him out did she head. When Claire was newly pregnant, she came all the way to St. Luce to find you, to tell you. She waited and waited, but you ignored her. She came back here, cried for a week, and packed her things and left. I never saw her again until I heard she'd died. Pierre frowned slightly, but said nothing. After that visit, he stopped going to the town and rarely thought of the unfortunate woman who had once spent countless nights by his side, carrying his ill-fated child. It wasn't until today, when the 2 white figures appeared in the courtyard at night, the mother and child hand in hand, vanishing into the fog, that he jolted with realization. He whispered in shock, "Could it be them? Coming back for revenge?" Marie, half asleep, turned to him, confused. What mother and child? Pierre didn't dare reveal his past to his wife, so he deflected casually. "You're still awake?" "I just dozed off and had a dream." Marie sat up, tying her hair, and said with a heavy sigh, "I know you weren't asleep. You're thinking about that girl from the town, from when you were obsessed with the cabaret, aren't you? You slept with her. She got pregnant, came to the village to find you, and you refused to meet her. Is that right?" Pierre, stunned, asked, How did you know?" Marie sighed, her voice tinged with tears. "I've known since then. Louis told me everything. You were cruel, Pierre. That was your child, and you abandoned her, pregnant and wandering the streets with no food, no clothes. Of course she gave birth prematurely, and both she and the baby died of hunger. Men having mistresses is common enough. Why didn't you tell me so I could help her? I didn't want you to be so heartless, for our daughters to bear the consequences." Pausing to let her words sink in, Marie continued, "Louis blames you for it. When he went to town, I told him to find her and give her some money. But the proprietress said she'd been gone for a long time, and no one knew where." Pierre lay silent, unsure of what to say. Even now, he felt no remorse for his cruelty to Claire. His only fear was that the ghosts of the mother and child were seeking vengeance. Defending himself, he said, "You call me cruel, but you're wrong. That day she waited for me, under the oak tree in the field. I didn't go, because how could I be sure the child was mine? Those cabaret girls entertain one man today, another tomorrow. Who knows who she was pregnant with?" Marie said nothing. More, she had kept this secret for years, silently resenting her husband's heartlessness. She held her tongue to shield their children, especially their daughters, from their father's flaws. She stood and lifted the window curtain to let in fresh air from the garden, but it was still too dark, so she lowered it again. The village was still asleep, the roosters silent. No sounds came from the kitchen, meaning Sophie hadn't risen to brew tea. Marie, dejected, took the lamp and headed to the kitchen, saying, "Go back to sleep to regain your strength. I'll boil some water." "Why not have Sophie do it?" Pierre asked. "It's too early. Let her sleep. I'm already up anyway." As Marie stepped out, Pierre lay alone. Recalling the day, Louis handed him a note urging him to meet Claire under the oak tree. The memory, buried for years, now flooded back. To ease his conscience, he told himself, "How could I know the child was mine?" No sooner had he spoken than a chilling gust swept through the room like a winter wind. The black cat yowled, leaping at the window curtain. Immediately, a series of knocks sounded not at the front door as before, but at the window, right beside his bed. Pierre shrank back, trembling, inching away, and stammering for Marie. The cat clawed furiously, growling and leaping up and down. Pierre tried to call out, but his throat felt constricted, producing only choked gasps. The knocking continued, and a child's voice poured into his ears. "Please, sir, some food. I'm so hungry." Pierre crawled to the edge of the bed and collapsed onto the floor. As he struggled to stand, a woman's voice, the same as the night before, came from outside the window. "Come back, my child. Come to your mother." The words repeated, fading into the distance until they were gone. Pierre, mouth agape, clutched his pillow, slowly standing. Just then, the front door swung open, and he screamed in terror only to see Marie returning from the kitchen, irritated. "What's wrong with you? Why do you keep shouting in the middle of the night?" Seeing him standing dazed in the middle of the room, she continued, "I was only gone for a moment, and you can't stay alone." Pierre, panting, replied, "They were here again, Marie. The mother and child." "Where?" "Calm down. Right outside the window. I was so scared I had to get up to find you. Get me some water." Marie, softening, said, "I'm heating some. The kettle's empty. For now, drink some rainwater." She stepped outside, and Pierre followed closely. On the porch, under the faint moonlight, he froze, seeing the two white figures, mother and child, hand in hand at the far end of the courtyard, moving silently toward the gate. He grabbed Marie's arm, pointing, and cried, "There they are. Do you see them? The mother and child." Marie shook her head. By now, she vaguely suspected her husband was being haunted, but she also believed his panic might be exaggerating things. A frightened mind sees ghosts in everything. Wearily, she said, I don't see anything. Just then, dogs howled mournfully. Outside the gate, barking fiercely before their sounds faded into the distance, returning the night to silence. Pier, trembling, said, That's them, the mother and child. In the kitchen, Pier gulped rainwater from a ladle, then shook his head wearily and said, Marie, we need to sell this house and move somewhere else. Marie dismissed the idea. What? Your ancestors' graves are here. How could we sell? And if you're really seeing ghosts, they follow people. Where could you go to escape them? For Pier, the ancestral graves and the grand house no longer mattered. He was too terrified. He'd go anywhere to escape those white figures. Shaking his head, he said, I can't stay here anymore. This house belongs to ghosts now. How can I live with them? Marie, pitying him, suggested, All right, how about this? Stay at Louis' for a few days and see how it goes. Marie made the suggestion reluctantly, worried her husband's panic would exhaust him. But she didn't want to burden Louis' family, busy with their trade and 2 young children. Pierre's nightly outbursts would only trouble his son and grandchildren. Pierre, however, nodded eagerly. Yes, I'll stay at Louis'. I'll die if I stay here. By the 3rd day, Pierre was visibly haggard. 2 sleepless nights had left him unable to eat more than a bowl or 2 of food. His face gaunt, eyes sunken, his vitality drained. He walked unsteadily, as if he might collapse at any moment. Daytime passed too quickly for him, and as the sun set, his fear returned. Marie sent Elise to fetch Louis to discuss having Pierre stay with him, but Louis was away in the province. Marie and Henry had gone to visit Claire, the second daughter, as Marie, believing in karma, was deeply worried for her daughters. Alone at home, Pierre paced the brick courtyard, lost in thought. A crow's caw startled him, and he looked up to see the same black crow perched on the sycamore tree, staring defiantly. He threw a clod of earth, and it let out a mournful caw before flying off. Moments later, glancing back, he saw it had returned to the same spot. Irritated but trying to ignore it, he wandered aimlessly, smoking his pipe and sipping tea, unable to stomach food. His only companion was the black cat, never leaving his side. At noon, he lay on a hammock by the house, the cat curled in his lap. About 20 meters away was a small pond, no bigger than 2 mats, dug years ago to raise fish. Suddenly, the cat bared its teeth, growled, and yowled, and leaped toward the pond. Pierre, startled, rolled off the hammock and fell to the ground, trembling as he watched the cat thrash and howl, though no one was near it. He knew the ghosts of the mother and child were there, just 20 steps away, and his loyal cat was fighting to keep them at bay. Sweat poured from him as he tried to stand and run inside, but couldn't move. Suddenly, the cat fell into the pond, struggling to surface, but invisible hands seemed to pull it under. It sank, rose, and sank again, and within moments, it lay still. Drowned out asterisk, Pierre lay frozen for a long time, too terrified to stand. His beloved cat was dead. His heart ached, both for the loss and for his own fear. Minutes later, he gripped a pillar to pull himself up, staggered to the pond, and lifted the cat's wet body, then sat lifelessly on the wild grass. Exhausted, he called out, "Sophie! Sophie!" Asterisk after a few calls, the maid heard and rushed up, gasping at the sight of the dead, soaked cat beside him. Cats are resilient, and in the countryside, Drowning is the only way to kill one. Bewildered, Sophie asked, "My goodness, sir, why did you kill the cat?" Pierre blurted out, "I didn't kill it. The ghosts did." Sophie stared, confused by his words. After a moment, she said, "Heavens! Without that cat, the rats will run wild. Shall I bury it, sir?" Asterisk Pierre, distracted, nodded. "Yes, bury it." From then on, he wandered like a man unhinged, pacing the porch, muttering nonsense. Losing the cat felt like losing a guardian. If ghosts could kill his cat, they could kill him too. Remembering Marie's advice, he went to the cemetery that afternoon, lighting incense and praying, preparing to sleep early to regain strength. Even the most stubborn man clings to prayer in times of crisis. Before leaving for her daughter's house, Marie had instructed Pierre, "Go to bed early while I'm gone. I'm just visiting Claire for a bit, and we'll be back soon." Pierre intended to sleep early, having noticed that the ghosts only tormented him in the pre-dawn hours. That noon, Dr. Martin, the village physician, had come to check his pulse and prescribe 7 doses of tonic, advising him to rest early to regain strength. Lack of sleep, the doctor said, could make one prone to panic. Despite Pierre's insistence, Dr. Martin refused to believe in ghosts, asserting that Pierre's weakened condition was causing nightmares. He said, "Ghosts? Nonsense. I'm over 70 and have never seen a ghost's face. Eat well, sleep regularly, and any ghost would flee from you." Pierre was irritated, but couldn't argue, unable to prove his experiences. He hoped the doctor was right, for if this continued, he feared he'd collapse from terror or exhaustion. Carrying a bundle of incense to the backyard, Pierre suddenly heard the black crow call from the sycamore tree, then fly after him, perching on a branch above, his head in the garden. He looked up, annoyed and uneasy, muttering and waving it away, but the stubborn crow stayed, staring at him. Sighing, he bent down, trying to ignore it, and continued down the slope to the cemetery. He needed to pray to his ancestors for protection, so he and his descendants could remain in the ancestral home, continuing to honor their lineage. The crow on the lemon tree let out a long, mournful call and flew off, not returning. Pierre, startled, froze in terror. About 30 meters from the cemetery, he saw the 2 white figures of the mother and child lying on a grave, shrouded in thick green smoke. Strangest of all, every incense stick, though unlit, was smoldering, creating a dense fog that made the white figures flicker in and out of sight. Trembling, Pierre stepped back, his back slamming into a tree, the incense bundle falling unnoticed. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. The figures were gone. The thick smoke that had risen from the grave had vanished without a trace. Stunned but relieved, he assumed it was a hallucination born of fear. He bent to pick up the incense sticks, hesitated, then turned back to the house, too afraid to approach the cemetery dot to be certain. He went to the kitchen, handed the incense to Sophie, and said, "Go put 3 sticks on each grave and light them for me." Sophie, surprised, asked, "Is today a special day for burning incense, sir?" Pierre mumbled, "Just remembering my ancestors." "No special day. Stop asking questions and go." Sophie, talkative by nature, found his request odd but held her tongue. Knowing Pierre's temper, the graves belonged to his family, not hers. If he wanted to honor his ancestors, why not do it himself? Still, seeing him so haggard and unwell the past 2 days, she sympathized, especially since the doctor had come to prescribe medicine. That morning, she'd asked Marie, "Is the master ill, Mom? Do you know what's wrong?" Marie, unsure how to respond, was cut off as Sophie continued, "Could he be haunted, ma'am?" Marie quickly dismissed it, fearing rumors. "Haunted? Nonsense. It's just the weather making him sick." She went to the bedroom and asked Pierre, "Where are they buried, the mother and child? Do you know? Maybe you should go to town, find out, and hold a memorial service for them." Pierre, stubborn, replied, "Memorial? I told you, I'm not even sure the child was mine. Why should I care?" Disheartened, Marie left to urge Lisa and Henry to prepare for the trip, instructing Sophie to keep an eye on Pierre's needs. Sophie took the incense and headed out, with Pierre secretly following, hiding behind a tree to watch. Nothing happened, no ghostly figures appeared. Clearly, his earlier panic had caused him to see things in broad daylight. He waited until Sophie finished lighting the incense, then hurried back inside before she could spot him lurking behind the lemon tree. The crow perched above him went unnoticed in the dim light. As he rushed inside, it cawed, startling him into cursing. On the porch, Pierre smoked his pipe, then went to his room. His heart nearly stopped when he saw the black crow perched on the windowsill above his bed. He threw a clog at it, and it cawed before flying off. He lowered the curtain and went to bed while it was still light outside. With Marie gone and the cat dead, the room felt oppressive, filled with an eerie dread. Despite the daylight, Pierre lay restless as a storm rolled in, darkening the sky. The wind howled through the trees, and amid the gusts, he faintly heard the voices of the mother and child outside the window, fading in and out. "My child, come to your mother, my child." His trembling hands pulled the blanket over his face as he held his breath, bracing for the terror to repeat itself. A sudden downpour unleashed torrents of rain, lightning flashing angrily after a week of scorching heat. Water roared down the tiled roof, and gusts splashed it against the window curtain. Pierre thought of Marie at Claire's house, wondering when the rain would stop for her to return. When the ghostly voices ceased, he mustered the courage to light the lamp, turning it up bright and placing it on the table where the cat used to sleep. But the wind whistling through the walls made the flame flicker, threatening to go out. He lifted the lamp, searching for a sheltered spot. As he fumbled in the middle of the room, a sudden knock at the door made him scream, dropping the lamp. He stumbled back to the bed and collapsed. It was only 7 in the evening, before the roosters roosted, yet the ghosts were already knocking. The knocks grew louder, followed by Sophie's voice cutting through the wind. "Sir, it's me, Sophie. Open the door." Pierre, relieved, clutched his chest and stood, opening the door. A fierce gust pushed it wide, splashing rain onto his face. Sophie rushed in, closing the door behind her. Her hair and clothes were soaked, water dripping down her face. She panted, "I got caught in the storm coming back from the cemetery, sir." Marie, returning from Claire's, was relieved to see Pierre sitting at the foot of the bed, his back to her in the dim, misty light. She sat up and scolded, "Where were you all night?" "I looked everywhere." Pierre sat silently, not turning, his head bowed. Marie chided gently, "Come on, get to bed. Why sit out there letting the mosquitoes bite?" As she reached to pull him into bed, Pierre stood quietly and shuffled toward the door. Annoyed, Marie slipped out of bed. "Where are you going?" "It's early. Why not sleep?" Pierre said nothing, hurrying to the porch and around to the back. Marie slipped on her clogs to follow, but despite the slippery, sloping path, dangerous in the rain, Pierre moved swiftly, as if avoiding her. By the time Marie reached the back porch, his figure was barely visible at the bottom of the slope leading to the cemetery. Irritated, she considered turning back, but pity overcame her. She knew Pierre was suffering a severe mental breakdown. Sighing, she grabbed a walking stick and headed to the cemetery to bring him back. But in the misty dawn, she looked around and couldn't find him. Stepping deeper into the cemetery, she froze, seeing mud scattered across the old graves. Climbing onto a low tomb, she called out, "Pierre, where are you? What are you doing out here?" No answer came. She scanned the area and let out a piercing scream in the silent morning. "Oh no! Pierre, are you all right? Pierre, how did this happen?" Her anguished cries dissolved in the rain and wind. "No, no, Elise! Henry, your father's dead. He's dead." Marie discovered a freshly dug pit, filled with water, with Pierre's body floating in it. He had drowned in the grave he'd frantically dug himself.